Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. We have a Golden Bachelor story to get to, which is why I'm wearing my Golden Bachelor t-shirt given to me by Mimi in Pittsburgh. Thank you for the t-shirt here. This will be my official Golden Bachelor t-shirt of the season. And a wild Golden Bachelor story we have for you today. So the last couple of days, yesterday, we announced the cast of the Golden Bachelor. Matt James' mom is going to be on the show, and there's a bunch of other beautiful women that'll be competing for love on Gary Turner's season of Golden Bachelor, premiering September 28th, I believe. Either way, this story is interesting because one of the cast members had a story come out actually 8 years ago, but it's a story she was willing to share. And so since it's on the internet and she was willing to share it, we're just going to discuss it here. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals, patreon.com/Dave Neal for behind the scenes bonus content, and also Bachelor Rush Hour, the hit podcast every afternoon. I guess there should be a trigger warning for this story. It's wild. I'm going to read the story and use the words they use. You can fill in other words if you feel like it deserves them. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. But the trigger warning would have to be, child abuse? What would you call this one? Frankie Valli took me at 16 and used me in decades-long affair. This was an article written in the New York Post here and features one of our Golden cast members, and we're going to talk about that. April Kirkwood says she lost her virginity to Frankie Valli at the age of 16 when he was 39. If you don't know him, if you're, Gen Z, you know his music, right? Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, Big Girls Don't Cry, December 1963, Oh, What a Night. In Greece, okay, so he's the lead singer and the frontman for the Four Seasons, beginning in 1960. I'm not going to be out here defending anybody. I don't know what the times were like. I don't know the proper way to have these conversations, but we do know in today's world, this would not fly. I think we can all agree with that. April Kirkwood's decades-long love affair with Frankie Valli began when she was just 6 years old. As she remembers it, she loved the Four Seasons more than anything, even at that age, and her mother and aunt would take young April to shows, talking their way backstage. April would make a beeline for Valli, and he'd scoop her up and carry her around while she nuzzled her face in his neck. 10 years later, she'd be losing her virginity to him at a Holiday Inn. Of course, in today's world, and this article was written 8 years ago, so I don't know if times were different 8 years ago. I'm not going to speak on that, but in today's world, we'd say this was the R word, right? We could say that. I'm not going to say it here because YouTube's weird when we have these types of discussions. 10 years later, she'd be losing her virginity to him at a Holiday Inn, and there's the photo. And again, what was her mom thinking? You know what I mean? He was 23 years older than me, Kirkwood says today, 39 to her 16. That first night was sad. I had never seen a naked man before. I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? And there they were. That night would set the tone for her romance with a front man for the Four Seasons in the 1960s, until the Beatles, the most popular band in the world. For me, there was nothing else, writes Kirkwood in her new memoir, Big Girls Do Cry, My Love Affair with Frankie Valli. So she wrote a book about it. So good for her for taking back, I don't know, her power or whatever here. She's a therapist. So if we go to her page on The Golden Bachelor, here she is, April, 65 years young. Several people got upset when I said 65 years young versus 65 years old. Don't be an idiot. It's 65 years young. Hometown Port St. Lucie, Florida, therapist. She dreams of writing a best-selling book. And of course, we do know she did write her book, her memoir, which, I don't know anyone who's read it, but clearly it's a story that it was worth telling for her, and hopefully it helped her out by coping with this real tragic and bizarre story. After having sex with Valli that first time, the singer said, "Now don't do this with anyone else." He added that it was late and she should get going home. I was smart enough to go. "Can I have your number?" Kirkwood says, and of course he gave me his manager's number. Kirkwood drove home a little after midnight, her mother waiting up. "Did you have a good time?" she asked. "Did you see Frankie at all?" "Yeah, Mom, thanks for letting me go. Night, love you." Not long after, while still attending high school in her native Youngstown, Ohio, Kirkwood asked her mother to drive her to Akron, an hour away, where Valli had summoned her to get on the tour bus. Her mother promptly put her on birth control. "I'll never forget what my mother said to him that day. 'Take care of my daughter.' He respectfully shook her hand. Kirkwood thinks her mother had the misguided notion that Valli was her daughter's ticket out of a tiny Ohio town off the chicken farm in which they were living with Kirkwood's grandmother and several aunts. Her mother had been abused as a girl and suffered from mental illness. Kirkwood's parents had divorced when she was 4. My mother was so twisted in her own pain that she would have done anything to get me out of there. So April joined the tour for a few days. It never crossed my mind that I was his Ohio groupie, his hookup, his lay on the road, she writes, but there she was, stashed on a cramped tour bus with no doors, only drapes, expected to have sex with Valli while his bandmates and crew listened. God damn, this is really messed up. That was awful, Kirkwood says today. The most embarrassing thing, but she was a teenage girl on the road with one of the most famous men in the world, and she was confused. Sex with a celebrity? What's the protocol? She asked. Valli would summon her to get on a bus or a plane he'd pay, always coach, to meet him in cities such as Akron, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and Holiday Inns, or sometimes Hiltons. She never questioned why he didn't fly her to San Francisco or Chicago or New York City. He was so glamorous to me, I think I could have met up with him at McDonald's. He was uneducated and unsophisticated, but she adored everything about him. The way he put French fries on top of his burger and smashed it all between the buns, the gold chains and velvet suits, his dick tax that she stay beautiful and never talk too much. It was a very first generation Italian-American thing. If you can't sleep with it, eat it, or drink it, it's no good to me. She went back to high school and dreamt of marrying Valli, even though Valli already had a wife. Then she saw the latest Four Seasons album, a blonde model named Marianne on the cover. She knew the next Mrs. Valli had been chosen already. That really killed me, she writes. I went blonde from that moment on. Even after a night together in Syracuse, when Valli lit a cigarette right after sex and casually said, "By the way, I think I'm going to marry my girlfriend," Kirkwood never gave up hope that she would eventually be the one. She listened to his endless complaints about his wives or girlfriends while the 5'4" singer strutted around the room naked. Frankie openly vented about his relationships as if he wanted to come clean somehow, Kirkwood writes. He vented about what he said to Marianne when she wrecked his car. I could sense that Frankie was still fuming as he recounted how he instructed the maid to get Mrs. Valli on the phone. Breathless and stunned, I always sat on the side of the bed, wrapped in sheets, knowing that once again I was considered only Miss Almost Good Enough. This had become a recurring nightmare upon returning home after brief stays with this legend. In 1975, Valli, his star fading, the Four Seasons culturally irrelevant to a new generation, electrified by Dylan and Hendrix and the Beatles and the Doors, sat for an interview with People magazine and spoke about his new wife, Marianne Hannigan. She was 20 years old when they met. She was a pal when I needed one, but because I'd been hurt before, I resisted what I was feeling about her. For her part, Kirkwood searched for men who reminded her of Valli, and she married and divorced twice, men she calls her substitute for Mr. Valli. Neither husband had a chance. Kirkwood thought only of Valli and what she could do to convince him she was worthy. I did anything, not just sexually, that he wanted, because deep in my heart I believed I would one day be the next Mrs. Frankie Valli. In 1980, Valli suffered 2 devastating losses. His stepdaughter Celia died after slipping on a fire escape, and 6 months later, his youngest Francine succumbed to a drug overdose. Kirkwood was 19 at the time and had been due to hook up with Valli in Hawaii. He disappeared from her life. 5 years passed. Kirkwood was living with Frankie Valli replacement number 2, a man named Billy, when the singer himself summoned her to Chicago out of the blue. She was elated. She went to Saks and bought dresses and lingerie that she couldn't afford and headed off to the airport, giddily flying coach from Ohio. In my mind, Frankie had waited for me to grow up. I wasn't his little plaything anymore. She spent 2 post-show nights with Valli until her boyfriend showed up. Kirkwood was furious, as was Valli, who sent her packing. She cried the entire flight home and felt more trapped than ever. Here she was in a tiny apartment in a suburb of Ohio, living with a boy of 18, convinced beyond all reason that he had ruined her best chance of becoming the rich, respected wife of an icon. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Valli. "Work on your marriage with your husband," he told her. "Maybe we will talk again soon." Kirkwood knew she'd never hear from him again and went into a deep depression. She spent days unable to get out of bed. "If I'd been committed to my career as I was to Frankie, I would be running my own private Ivy League school by now," she writes. Kirkwood eventually settled for Billy, marrying and having 2 children before divorcing him nearly 20 years later. Her certainty that she'd never see Valli again was unfounded. Nearly 15 years later, in 1995, she resumed hooking up with him on the road. Little had changed. After sex, Valli would complain to Kirkwood about his latest wife, Randy, who was 26 years younger. She told him about her newest boyfriend, Ron, another Valli doppelganger, this one married. "April, if he's seeing you, he probably has other girlfriends too," Valli told her. "And if by some slim chance he does leave his wife, you will become the wife and someone will replace you." Kirkwood couldn't believe the hypocrisy, yet she quickly looked past it, just as she looked past all the things she heard from his entourage about Valli's issue with food, eating disorders that had him binging on maple syrup. She looked past the night Valli couldn't find her and instead tried to sleep with her aunt. Oh, so Valli tried to sleep with her aunt. She looked past the time she walked by his dressing room and caught him making out with a backup singer. There's her book, Big Girls Do Cry, My Love Affair with Frankie Valli, written by April Kirkwood, star of Golden Bachelor. She'd glowed on her friendship with Valli to people who knew him, only to hear, oh yeah, he's a heck of a performer, a mean human being. Everybody thought he was arrogant. I think he's a very, very, very selfish person. Still, she couldn't escape him. When Jersey Boys debuted on Broadway, she went, tears streaming down her face the entire time. This is my story, she says. Even though I'm not in it, this is my truth. Innuendo about girls on the road or about one of his wives. What killed me is that I'd been there for the whole thing. One of her last encounters with Valli was in 2005, as always, backstage after a show. She had tracked down his email address after an airline stewardess sold the story of her affair with Valli to the National Enquirer. Kirkwood had written something like, see, at least I never sold you out. So wait a second. An airline stewardess, so does that mean that she told an airline stewardess her story, which was sold to National Enquirer? That's bizarre. Valli saw her standing backstage with Ron and marched over, finger pointing. Kirkwood thinks Valli's fourth wife saw the email. He sees me and he starts screaming, how dare you email me? I'm always in trouble with him. It never goes right. Unable to stay awake, Kirkwood tried again. On Thursday night, Valli was playing a show in her Ohio neighborhood at a venue called the Lake Club. She'd bought a $995 Irv Leisure dress, 2 tickets, one for herself, one for Ron, and arrived at the venue 3 hours before showtime, clutching a copy of her book. She went looking for Valli. I talked to someone from Frankie's camp, and he goes, oh, you're her, Kirkwood says. She tried to give him the book, which she'd inscribed, no effing way, he said. I'm not touching this. She spent, which by the way, makes sense. She wrote a tell-all memoir about him that probably paints him in probably an accurate way, but of course he's like, no, get away from me. She spent the next few hours asking waitresses and staff where she could find Valli, and when she got close, 8 bodyguards came out. They also refused to take the book. Kirkwood and her boyfriend took their seats in the 5th row, Kirkwood sobbing her way through the entire set. She got drunk and her boyfriend took her home and put her to bed. I'm heartbroken, she says. Personally, I think Frankie is a mother effer. He was the love of my life, and I don't think he ever cared for me. Though she said it before, this time Kirkwood, now 57, again, this was 8 years ago, says she really means it. I am done. I am so done. And that's the article. That's a wild article on a random Thursday in Bachelor Nation. Here's what April posted on her Instagram yesterday. It's all happening. Love the vibe in Hollywood. I feel at home. The people are classy yet very hip. Thankful for this opportunity. I am blessed. Can't wait to share this journey with you. Starts September 28th, 8 p.m. So she's a therapist. Now look, she is a victim. Make no doubt about that. She is a victim of being groomed by an adult who was over double her age, and her mom seems to have sold her out, like she said, probably defending her mom for a better life, but wild stuff. When she posted this reel, which showed, her stats and her photo, she included the song Can't Take My Eyes Off of You by Frankie Valli. This is a bizarre story. Again, she is the victim here. She's got her tell-all memoir, which she is absolutely entitled to write. Big Girls Do Cry, My Love Affair with Frankie Valli. Now, did she really love him, or was this some obsession from her childhood youth? I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. But to share her story now with our Bachelor audience, I think it's fair. She wrote a book. She's talking about it, and it's interesting. We wish her well on her journey, and I don't know what else to say about that, but Golden Bachelor is already delivering. How fascinating. We'll have more content for you this afternoon on the podcast. I've got Nick Viall and Natalie Joy talking about how Natalie's mom wasn't cast because she looked too young. I'll have more of that content on Bachelor Rush Hour, the podcast, coming up next.